Listen close, because some moments arrive so quietly they almost pass unseen. A woman with 2 children stepped into a town that wanted nothing from her, until one man spoke words that would redraw all their lives. This is not a story of rescue, but of recognition, and of how a single choice can turn strangers into family. No one would offer a home to the Apache woman with 2 children, until the cowboy said, with a voice steady as the land itself, "I had 2 already. Now we are 6. They came in just after sunrise, when the light was still soft and forgiving. Their footsteps slow and careful as they crossed the dusty main street of the frontier town. The woman held the older child's hand, while the younger rested against her hip, his small weight familiar and grounding. The 3 of them moving like shadows that hoped not to draw attention, yet attention found them anyway. Townsfolk paused in mid-step, hands hovering over crates, reins slackening in their grip, eyes narrowing with a mixture of suspicion and unease, as though the simple sight of an Apache woman walking openly through their world had shifted something underfoot. She kept her gaze lowered, not from shame, but to shield her children from the chill she had long learned to expect. As they passed the general store, she leaned close to the older boy and whispered for him to stay near her, her voice calm, though her heart struck unevenly in her chest. She had come because she had heard stories whispered along the trails, of opportunity, of places where a person could begin again if they were willing to endure the road to get there. But each door she approached brought the same quiet refusal. The innkeeper shook his head before she could speak. The boarding house matron pulled her curtain closed the instant she appeared. Men lingered on wooden porches and turned their backs as she passed, pretending interest in anything but her presence. She had endured worse in her life, the loss of her home, the deep ache of grief carried silently, so her sons would not see it break through her composure. Yet the polished cruelty of this town cut deeper than open hatred ever had, because it showed how easily people could deny another's humanity without raising their voices. She moved to the edge of the street and lowered herself to the ground. With her children, more to rest their tired legs than to invite pity. Even so, she felt the weight of watching eyes from across the boardwalks and storefronts. Her boys remained quiet, not because they understood rejection, but because they sensed the tightness in her arms each time someone passed too close. She pulled them nearer, and the older one asked softly whether they should keep walking, whether there might be another town where someone would let them stay. She wanted to answer without hesitation, to give him hope wrapped in certainty, but exhaustion stole the words before they reached her lips. Instead, she smoothed his hair and told him they would be all right, because they had survived everything else together. As the morning stretched into heat and the sun bounced off the dust, passers-by continued to glance their way with that same distant curiosity, and though no one spoke it aloud, the message hung in the air. She was not welcome here. Her children were not welcome. This town would remain indifferent to their need. She studied the storefronts, the horses tied to posts, the people whose lives seemed neatly arranged with no room for someone like her. And she wondered if coming here had been a mistake. Perhaps she should gather what strength remained and walk on until her legs could no longer carry her. The younger child tugged at her sleeve and asked when they would find a place to sleep, and she swallowed the sting rising in her throat, forcing her voice to remain steady as she answered soon, even though she had no idea where that might be. It was then she noticed a man approaching from the far end of the street. He did not hurry, nor did he linger, but walked with a deliberate calm, as if he had already made a decision before his boots touched the dirt. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a work-worn vest, and a holster that spoke of experience rather than menace. He carried himself like someone used to reading danger and choosing quickly who needed help. The townsfolk noticed him too, eyebrows lifting in curiosity, waiting to see whether he would also pass by or offer the same dismissive gestures she had endured all morning. He did neither. He stopped a few feet from her, his shadow falling lightly across the children, and she looked up with a tired alertness, braced for whatever words might come. Instead, he removed his hat with an ease that caught her off guard. then bent slightly so he would not loom over them. He extended his hand, not as a demand, but as an invitation, a gesture free of doubt or condescension. She hesitated, uncertain whether this kindness would twist into something cruel, but his voice was steady when he spoke, telling her she did not need to keep wondering, that no one should be made to raise children without a place to rest. She searched his face for the judgment she had seen everywhere else, but found only a warmth that felt rare in towns like this, and rarer still when offered to someone like her. The older boy leaned subtly toward him, sensing trust before understanding it, while the younger pressed closer to her side, waiting for her choice. The cowboy looked at all three of them and said that if no one here had room, then they could make room together, because he had 2 children of his own, and they had learned that family did not have to begin at birth. His words were plain, almost understated, yet they carried a weight that settled into the air and changed it. The kind of truth that did not need repeating. She breathed out slowly, not in relief but in cautious wonder, testing whether the world would allow her to accept kindness after so much refusal. When she asked why he would do this for strangers, he answered simply that anyone who loved their children, the way she clearly did, should not be left alone to face the world. The street behind them had gone quiet, townsfolk watching from a distance, unsure whether to feel unsettled or impressed. The cowboy seemed unaware of them as he waited. At last, she nodded and placed her hand in his, feeling the calloused strength of someone who had worked through hardship and still held space for others. Her sons looked up at him with eyes holding a careful spark of possibility, and as he helped them stand, her life shifted in a way she could never have imagined, not because she had been saved, but because she had been seen as someone worth standing beside. The woman remained seated long after the children had drifted into sleep, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house. It was a sound she had not trusted in years, the steady breathing of safety, the kind that did not vanish when morning came. The cowboy moved about with unspoken care, setting things in order, checking the doors, tending to small tasks that showed he expected them to stay. When he finally spoke, it was only to say she could rest, that tomorrow would come soon enough. She thanked him, the words feeling small compared to what filled her chest, and lay beside her sons, one hand resting on each of them, as if to anchor the moment in place. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep, untouched by fear. The days that followed unfolded without ceremony. She rose early, helping where she could, learning the rhythms of the ranch not as a favor, but as a shared responsibility. The cowboy never issued commands. He asked, he listened, he explained. When decisions were made, her voice was included, not out of politeness, but because it mattered. Her children followed his, mirroring their movements. Learning through example rather than instruction, laughter returned in small pieces at first, hesitant and surprised, then louder, freer, filling spaces that had long remained quiet. She watched her sons change, their shoulders easing, their eyes lifting more often toward the sky instead of the ground. Word traveled back to town as it always did. Some spoke with disapproval, others with reluctant respect. No one came to confront him. Those who knew the cowboy understood that his choices were not made lightly, and once made, they did not bend. She felt the weight of judgment less with each passing day, not because it disappeared, but because it no longer defined her. She had work. She had purpose. She had a place where her children slept without fear. That was stronger than any stare or whispered opinion. One afternoon, as she mended a tear in her younger son's shirt, the cowboy approached her with a hesitation she had not seen before. He told her she was free to leave whenever she wished, that she owed him nothing. The thought startled her more than she expected. She realized then that she had stopped, measuring her days by survival alone. She told him that people who had lost everything learned to read truth through actions, not words, and that every kindness he had shown her, children had already answered any question she might have had. He nodded, relief softening his expression. And from that moment, something unspoken settled between them, steady and sure. Months passed, shaping them into something whole. Chores were shared. Stories were told by firelight. The children grew together, not bound by blood, but by trust earned day by day. She often remembered the moment she sat in the dust of that town, believing her future had narrowed to almost nothing. Now she understood that the world sometimes stripped a person bare, not to punish them, but to guide them toward where they were meant to belong. One evening she stepped outside and looked across the land, wide and open beneath the fading light. The cowboy joined her, standing close without words. None were needed. Inside, 6 children slept under one roof, safe and unafraid. She realized then that what had begun as rejection had ended in choice. Not rescue, not charity, but 2 broken paths crossing at the right moment, forming a family built on courage, dignity, and the quiet strength to say, "You are not alone anymore."